for your time. In the last 24 hours, about the leaders of Mozambique and Tanzania who signed defense and security agreements aimed at fighting terrorism and crime along their shared border. Not much detail has been released about that agreement. The area has battled a deadly insurgency for the past 5 years. Let's speak about this with terrorism expert Jasmine Opperman, who's been tracking movements along northern Mozambique's border for several years now. Jasmine, welcome back to Daytime Update. Could this deal be a game changer, you think?
Good afternoon to Mikili and good afternoon to the viewers. No, it cannot be a game changer. This is nothing new. We have seen similar agreements in 2020 between the two countries supporting coordinated military operations along an 800-kilometer border, the Rovuma River. You are sitting with the Mokondo communities that are split by the river, and trade has been taking place, and with that illegal trade for hundreds of years. So to think that we are going to have an overnight improvement in security in Mozambique and Tanzania, in Cabo Delgado and the Mtwara region on the border, a military or enhanced military presence will not deal with the problems we are currently confronted with.
But Mozambique's President Nyusi, speaking after this deal had been reached or announced at least, said that, quote-unquote, life was beginning to return to normal. So what exactly have they agreed to do that would give them the confidence that things are returning to what they used to be?
We have to keep in mind, if government officials make statements like this, we are looking at MDP Mozambique and Tanzania itself and Palma, where there's massive military presence, and it's all about a normalization narrative to speed up the return of the gas companies into gas exploration that hopefully will benefit not only Mozambique but the region. But to speak about normalization in Cabo Delgado as a whole, or the presence of peace, is simply not a factual reflection of what we are seeing in terms of incidents, attacks on security forces, and the Islamic State now becoming the formal voice of the insurgents in propagating their narrative.
You say that, and President Nyusi again yesterday said that according to what he's putting forward now as the head of state in Mozambique, basically he said the enemy is operating in small groups and appears to be heading more south. Are you saying that's not true, Jasmine?
And again, the context is important to Mikili. What is important here is following the initial deployments, the successes around NDP and Palma, the insurgents have withdrawn massively from these areas. They have realigned. They are fighting in smaller groups. But there's two things I want to make clear to your viewers. They are not running. They're directing the momentum, Makumia, Nangadi, and now two definitive movements down south. In May and now again September, we have seen the insurgents moving down south, clearly with an objective, distracting security force attention away from the areas they are present. To equate smaller groups is to underplay the overall tactic and strategy at play within these insurgent groups. We must not underestimate how they are adjusting to a counterinsurgency offensive that is still more reactive than proactive.
Given that then, this move, we've spoken a lot about the movement and fighting in the north. What is happening south, and what would have informed a decision by these insurgents to move in that direction?
What is important to understand is that Nampula is nothing new to the insurgents. It has been a feeding stream. We are sitting with foreign IDPs camps in Nampula, which also brings back to an ideal feeding ground among the youth for the insurgents. These two push offensives, one, deviate attention, two, go out, find support, find recruitment, spread the ideology. They are not staying there permanently. Once they have moved with a devastating, bloodthirsty actions, they simply revert back into Makumia, and we always see how Nangadi picks up in incidents once the push south takes place, which talks to a coordinated strategy in keeping the counter forces reactive, keeping them on the next step, and with that makes it extremely difficult for some armed forces as well to be able to proactively counter these movements. And Temekile, if you can bear with me, for as long as this freedom of movement persists, they will direct the momentum and this menace will continue.
You mentioned recruitment. I wonder if there's any way of telling at this point how well that is even going for these insurgents, and why it would be that more people are still willing to, quote-unquote, join the movement.
We're going back to the root causes, which is well researched. We're going back to youths that are frustrated. We are going back to youths that has a serious anti-government sentiment. We are sitting with a generational problem of a Cabo Delgado, forgotten Cabo Delgado, with a lack in government. And this comes in now with your first question. For these sentiments are prevailing as we are talking today, which means they will always find this feeding ground. And what is of concern to the region now is that the Islamic State has hijacked this narrative. Note my past tense. There's an international terror group that has successfully hijacked this narrative and used it to its own advantage with serious implications for the region. We cannot underestimate this. And for as long as we're going to have a government focused on a military approach, which I am not saying is not necessary, it is necessary, but we're talking about between 4,000 and 5,000 foreign troops in Cabo Delgado, be it directly involved in counterinsurgency or training. EU is giving more lethal weapons. Iraqification is running at a speed. It's a band-aid plaster of normalization for as long as the youths and the problems that is spiraling and drive them to the insurgency remains not being addressed.
What then is the level of risks you think to neighboring Tanzania, given that border situation, but more broadly, if these IS recruits or even long-standing members are able to cross over and make it into Tanzania, further into the country?
It is a high risk. It's a high vulnerability. We cannot deny the link. If we're going to talk about land border, about borders between the two states, that there is a persistent contact between communities, persistent economic trade between communities, a persistent mistrust towards Tanzanian security forces by these local communities. We cannot deny that there are mosques in Tanzania with a far more, I want to call it aggressive interpretation, more radical interpretation, encouraging the youth to a more fundamentalist orientation, and with that, those feeding streams cannot be denied. That Tanzanians have been killed and arrested as part of the insurgent group, we have verified that information. However, I have to just put in a caveat. Just note that for now, if one looks at the insurgency, most of the leaders are still predominantly from Cabo Delgado, that the foreign influences from Tanzania is at play. And hence, I believe this renewed agreement in an attempt to counter it. But again, I'm saying military deployments is not sustainable, will not turn this around overnight for the people of Cabo Delgado.
Jasmine Opperman, thank you for your time.